if you view the world as just about reach and not about what you're trying to do with that reach, then yeah, that's where you end up. You just pile money in. And we had to change people's perceptions.
Welcome to What Gets Measured, a Ninja Cat podcast about marketing, performance management, metrics, and effectiveness. Because what gets measured gets managed. I'm your host, Jake Sanders. James Hankins has spent nearly 2 decades as a strategist working with some of the world's most recognizable brands, such as Ikea, BMW, John Lewis, Coca-Cola, and KFC, and recently founded his own strategic marketing business consultancy, Visor. James is a mentor at the Institute of Practitioners in Advertising, where he also co-chairs a share of search think tank. He's worked on all sides of the marketing spectrum. At Manning Gottlieb, Visium UK, he's currently the Global VP of Marketing Strategy and Planning at Sage Software, and now he brings his hexagonal heat to What Gets Measured. James, how are you, sir?
Yeah, not too bad. Thank you very much, Jake. Thanks very much.
All right. So marketing metaphors, they're everywhere. We have customers flowing through funnels, marching down paths to purchase, and embarking on journeys. Tell us why you think we should be thinking about this process differently, and explain the Hankins Hexagon.
So the Hankins Hexagon kind of comes out of a review that I did a few years ago now of the various different path to purchase models. And I do mix these two things up quite a bit, the path to purchase, consumer pathway, but also funnels. Ultimately, they're metaphors for journeys of some sort. So I did a historic review a few years ago, and I posited that there was another solution, which was I doodle a lot. I do a lot of doodling. Okay. And what do I doodle? I doodle pentagrams because obviously I work in marketing and therefore worship the devil.
Right. I was going to say.
But with a pentagram, you can put your pen on the paper and you can move it across and it joins. You never have to take your pen off the paper. And you can move around the pentagram to each individual point continuously in a variety of different directions. And it got me thinking about pathways and paths to purchase. And that's essentially where the hexagon came from, because I've been kicking around this concept of there are stages or nodes or moments in time that are common to almost every single purchase journey, even if those stages last for a microsecond in the mind. And so these are fixed points, but arguably consumers rebound off them like they do with the pentagon in many different routes. And there's feedback loops. You can see the McKinsey model that built in a feedback loop, et cetera, et cetera. So I was kind of like, well, hang on a bit. If you've got common points during a process, but you don't know the order because the order is impossible to know, then that fits with this kind of hexagonal pentagon model. And I worked out that there were 6, which is why it wasn't 5. And also I wanted to stay away from the devil worship because, you know what, it's just a minefield. As soon as you go in there, you get people turning up on your doorstep with kind of flames and everything.
Yeah, great people on both sides of that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So that's where it came from. It came from an understanding that there are fairly traditional, standardized points, but they aren't in a straight line. They don't occur in a straight line. And so once you apply them to this kind of concept of the hexagon, joined at each point to every other point, you can begin to use that as a metaphor for journeys. And you can see that people move around them in a number of different manners, and it's open. And that's essentially what the hexagon is. It is a way of theoretically mapping potential journeys. Now, there's maths that sit below it, and there's very, very complex maths, and I am not a mathematician. But if there are mathematicians out there, they will know about Markov chains. And Markov chains is the mathematical theory that underpins it, which is that you kind of from one state to another, and kind of A to B has got a consistent probabilistic figure at any one point, and it's consistent over time. So the likelihood of going from A to B is, I don't know, 0.2%, the likelihood of B to C, 0.3%, and the reverse as well. So you've got those probabilities. And if you wanted to really take the hexagon to the nth degree, because there's ways of doing it, you could go into that methodology. You could apply kind of sorry, I'm turning this into a geek fest.
No, I love it. I'm into Markov chains.
So you got your probabilities, but you can use Bayesian techniques to work out those probabilities over time, and suddenly you have a map that tells you the probability of moving at any one point between two of these nodes, depending on which way you go. And then you've got and statements. So if you're going from A to B and B to D, the probabilities are multiplied by each other, and you go, right, the probability that someone will do this is X.
Well, no, if you're talking about if and statements, I mean, a lot of people listening to this podcast might be familiar with the, coding, where that's a very familiar kind of language. But we talk about these nodes. There's how many nodes are they, and what are they specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are 6 nodes. Therein lies the hexagon. Now, originally, and there's two versions of the Hankins hexagon with different labels. So one was the original version, and another I worked with Dan White, who's a I suppose he draws beautiful pictures, and he's turned the Hankins hexagon into a wonderful picture, whereas mine is a bit, Microsoft Paint. Right. So the stages that I came up with were passive assimilation. Now that is the moment in time where we all spend most of our time with relation to brands. We are not in the purchase cycle. We are not thinking about the purchase cycle, but we live in the world. And so we assimilate. We passively assimilate messages and brands and information, and it just happens, right?
Totally.
We're going about our life, and it happens to us. Then there's the trigger. At some point, something, some need, some external event triggers you into the purchase pathway. Now, the moment in time, so we'll get to this in a moment. Some people are going, well, yeah, but you know what? That means that's a linear pathway. People have to go through that pathway. Well, I'll explain why not shortly. So you've got passive assimilation, then you've got trigger. And I'm just going to go round clockwise. Active evaluation. So you go into the market and you go, right, okay, I am going to long list. I'm going to look at, Volvos and BMWs and Audis and all the premium cars. And I'm going to go, right, which ones am I interested in? Okay, I'm interested in 3 of those. And I'm going to compare 3 of those. And that's when you step into, arguably, comparison and shortlisting. Once you've shortlisted, you kind of make a decision, purchase, and then once you post-purchase. So what you have with the hexagon is a linear structure around the outside. What you've got within is a web of backwards and forwards and ziggies and zaggies between each node, and we call them nodes. So you could passively assimilate, and then you could suddenly, you go purchase, because actually, you know what, you've signed up for an auto alert from Amazon. There's no real trigger. It just purchases for you. Like, that's a purchase pathway. You're passively assimilating, and Amazon have circumvented every single other purchase stage, and you buy and you're straight into purchase.
And
no trigger there.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're almost pointing out the thing that was most illuminating to me when I was reading this article, where and we'll provide a link in the show notes. The most interesting thing is not the nodes. It's the interrelationships that are possible, the probabilities. And I love that you kept on stressing the fact of probabilities, because you could skip a trigger. You might not know why. You might need to be like cognitively aware why the trigger happened, but you might not You can go from passive assimilation to purchase. So how does this also relate to pinball? Because you
How does this
mentioned
relate?
you mentioned pinball in the article, and I think that helps explain the inner relationship between the nodes.
Yes, because what pinball does is applies a brand lens over the top of this and goes, okay, what's within our armory to help move people around the board? So I used to love pinball. I still love pinball. If I go into an arcade, I'll play pinball. I'm rubbish at it, but I love it. And the idea is, with the pinball metaphor, is that marketing levers and business levers can be used at each one of those points to keep consumers within play, or to guide them towards a node, increase the probability. Because we talk about geometry, it's a hexagon, right? Geometry and stuff like that. Essentially, geometry and probability are built into the Hankins hexagon when you talk about it as probability, as pinball, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
You essentially go, right, okay, how do you increase the probability when you flick your flickers of somebody going from shortlist to purchase to post-purchase? How do you improve that? And you go, right, so I've got these Markov chains that tell me the probability of that. How can I improve that probability by changing what I do at that stage? And how do I test and learn it? So I'm shortlisting, and from shortlist to purchase is, I don't know, 0.5. So it's quite a high probability. How could I notch it up to 0.55? What could I do with my marketing levers to improve that? Or product levers or whatever. So that's where the pinball came, is because marketers apply that metaphor over the top and they go, right, yeah, we could improve the probabilities by doing X, Y, and Z. Where it gets super cool, though, in my mind, is that there's a common pathway. There's a common pathway at a category level. And if you listen to Mark Ritson, he talks about bespoke funnels, and every business has a bespoke funnel. And that's kind of what we have here, because you have a pathway that's common to that category and understanding it. It's very, very rare to have too many nodes than 6, but you could. But within that, buying a car is different to buying milk, for example. The common pathway, the one that most people go through, the normal distribution. And if you understand that, if you understand the normal distribution, it's kind of a bit like click path analysis.
Yes.
It's like a real version of that. If you understand that normal distribution, the one that the majority of people go through, then you can arrange your marketing investment to optimize against that if you're a follower. But you know what? If you're really, really clever, you can work out what the common pathway is and you can look to circumvent it. I.e., you optimize a certain level of that and you change the way that people move through that by doing something. Adding a new product, changing the way that people buy. The dash buttons are pretty much obsolete now, but it's that sort of innovation whereby you go, you know what? Set up a dash button and no one will ever have to go through that purchase funnel or purchase process before, because it's automated and nobody thinks. And that is where it gets really clever.
Wow.
There's layers there, and we whacked through it. Wow.
No, I'm just so excited that we whacked through it, because and people are going to have to spend time reading this excellent Marketing Week article that you wrote about this. But I think you're hitting on the point, and to the point of this show is you're really going to have to be aware of measurements. You're going to have to be capturing data. And I think, we love the reports. We have our dashboards. We got our analytics and data. How does reportability factor into the Hankins hexagon? What are you?
Yeah. So arguably, I mean, you go into it and you go, right, okay, if we're talking KPIs, certainly not key KPIs, because who says key KPIs? I mean, come on, Jake. If we've got KPIs, there's 6 of them, right? There's 6 of them.
Based on the nodes. Is
based on the nodes. Yeah, based on the nodes. And what you're looking to do is essentially work out the probability amongst those KPIs. So what is the move from the representative number of what's the best example? So let's have a look. Let's turn it into something real. So passive assimilation would be your total addressable market. It would be your category users, right? Anyone, and then within that, you could argue that you've got reach. Okay, well, these are the people that we're actually speaking to, or what you could serviceable, attainable market. But it's the big number, the big volume number, right? Okay, so that's that. How many people buy a product per annum? Because that's your triggered number. That's the people who enter the market at any one point. It's different from the TAM. So it's that. So you go, right, okay. Then you go active evaluation. Well, where does that happen? An easy one, let's say comparison websites. Right, okay, so comparison websites. There's 3 in the UK. There's 3 comparison websites, financial products, and they've got an overlap of, I don't know, 70% between each of them. So maybe you look at the total volume, the overlap between those in terms of that long list comparison. You go, yeah, you've got a slightly lower number than the trigger, because not everyone goes through that. You go, right, okay, so you've got these people long listing, and they're doing it because they're going through these comparison websites. Right now, they're shortlisting mentally. What's the metric that we can use that represents that? Is it people coming to our site? Is that the next one added to the competitor site? So there's a lot of data thinking and metrics and measurement that come through this, and obviously purchase is the easy one, because you know how many people buy.
That's our favorite one.
Yes. And then you've got the ring. You've got the ring then it's about working out, okay, well, of the people who move through that process, because that's the biggest, going to be the biggest number. How many people do we think move from passive assimilation, say, to trigger straight to purchase? They don't appear in active evaluation, and they don't appear in comparison. And it's a very simple calculation. That's essentially what you turn into the dashboard.
The data set. Those are like your widgets. I mean,
yeah.
You need a Hankins. You need a Hankins Hexagon widget.
Yeah, I do.
That's it.
Sell it.
We're building it.
That's my SaaS product.
We're building it. Sassy, you sassy man. So excellent. You've really helped, because it isn't just a generic dashboard that you stuff this into. It's that you now understand the numbers of your market and then create a dashboard, reports, whatever you want, that's based on those numbers. And then the levers that you choose are up to you, custom in your category. I mean, this is just so, it's brilliant. This is salt, pepper. I don't want to put anything on it. I don't want to ruin the taste. Let's go to the next question. So you've worked with an impressive roster of brands in your career. Do you have like a Cinderella story about, this measuring marketing effectiveness and path to purchase? Do you have like a Eureka moment?
I do have a Eureka moment. And it's a good one. It's actually linked to the classic ways of measuring brand health, in inverted commas. So it's your awareness, consideration, purchase numbers. I mean, absolutely fine. Nothing wrong with it. But the story, the Cinderella moment, is related to Ikea. So I was fortunate enough to work on Ikea in around 2011 to 2013, I think it was. I'm also a co-author of The Wonderful Everyday. So with the guys over at Mother in the UK who essentially wrote it. I still have the deck that I wrote that provided the Eureka moment for the Wonderful Everyday. And the Eureka moment was, and this sounds really silly when you say, the Eureka moment was that awareness and consideration were trending together, i.e., you were getting to a point where, I mean, consideration was fairly flat, but awareness was declining and declining until it was nearly the same size. So we were like, right, okay, this is quite interesting. So you're aware of something and you consider it, but there's very little difference between those numbers within the population. So what that told us was that people it almost worked in reverse. And this is where it relates back to the hexagon, is that if you didn't consider IKEA, you weren't aware of it. You blanked everything else out. You ignored it. It wasn't relevant to you. You'd moved on. And when you think about how IKEA used to be viewed, it was all about cheap. And it was cheap furniture. Whereas if you go further back, IKEA was all about design and clever design. And that is what had originally launched the business. That is what made it huge. And they've kind of got into a bit of a rut. And that's what we were seeing here, is that people viewed them in a very specific way. And once they didn't view you as an option, you vanished. So it wouldn't matter how much you spent on advertising, communications, you were ignored because you weren't on their set, their comparison set, their consideration set. That was the Eureka moment, because we were like, right, okay, we have to go back and we have to reinvigorate and we have to change people's minds about what IKEA absolutely is about. And it's about clever magic design. It's about we put our effort into making products that are beautiful, but they are also practical and functional. So you can just go about and live your life. And it's the magic in the design that came through. And the reason for that is because people were just seeing us as a cheap, commoditized furniture holder. And that was the Eureka moment, is that analyzing that data and the trends in that data took us to the Wonderful Everyday.
Just almost passed out. Oh, because there's so many people that fight, and maybe I'm internally fighting. We're just saying maybe if we spent more and reached more, if you just increased your impressions, you don't have to change anything, just increase your impressions. But what you're saying is that there's no amount of awareness that could change consideration.
Yeah, I mean, this was it. It's kind of, if you view the world as just about reach and not about what you're trying to do with that reach, then yeah, that's where you end up. You just pile money in. And we had to change people's perceptions of IKEA and move them away from a cheap furniture provider, which is where they'd ended up. And they were doing well. They were doing well.
They're IKEA.
But they could have been doing so much better.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, this was post 2008. I mean, they were hoovering up, but they could have been so much better. And you look at where IKEA are today and how people view them and the brand partnerships that they've gone into with these kind of top designers, et cetera, et cetera. That reinvigoration over a number of years has changed, has reminded people why IKEA became so great. In the UK, they launched in the 90s, but yeah, that's why they were brilliant, because they went ground up, beautiful, brilliant design that enables you to live your life to the max. And the magic from our perspective is all in the design. So yeah, that's the Eureka.
It's so beautiful. Do you have a quick horror story? It's not necessary, but do you have like oh my gosh, red lights flash horror story about people not following the data or getting kind of this path to purchase wrong or?
I think a lot of people still don't get the Ehrenberg Bass work. So the reach is what it's all about, but it's active reach, i.e., the point with IKEA is that we're trying to do something. So what's the objective for that reach? And I still think people don't get that. There's a lot of people out there that funneling loads of cash into laser focused digital targeting. You get it a lot in the States, the obsession with one-to-one communications, and it's been proven time and time again. Open it up, speak to more people, and you can reverse those negative trends where you're just getting tiny volumes, highly efficient, but your market share's up the Swanee, and you're shrinking. And I suppose that's a neat segue into the other thing that I've been doing with share of search.
Yes.
Which is about market share, and that's performance, not results. So that is how you perform relative to your competition and whether you're winning relative to your competition, as opposed to beating your own results year on year on year on year. I don't care if you've grown 10% versus last year, if you've only grown relative to the category that's growing at 20%. Like,
my
heart. So you lost all that.
My heart hurts because I think it's like everyone's like, beat your own records, just be better than you were yesterday, and you're like, as compared to what?
Exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
Hankins. Yeah. Oh, you're just okay. Can you just riff a little bit on share of search? Can you just sort of kind of give us a little kind of ballpark, pitch for that?
Yeah. Share of search. So share of search is a very simple metric that can be derived from Google Trends. So a tool that everyone's got access to. And once you treat the data, the explanation of how you treat the data is out there on the internet. I published it, and others have also published it as well. Once you've treated it in Excel, it's not that difficult. You get a remarkable proxy for market share of market. So share of search equals share of market. Now, why is that important? Because market share is how competitive you are, how you are performing versus your competitors. It's not internally focused, it's externally and market focused. And if you're winning, then your share of search should go up, or your share of market should go up. And so every single business and brand in the world has access to a free tool that tells them whether they're beating their competitors or not. Ultimately, that's how simple it is. I mean, there's a bit more,
there is a bit more nuance, and we will provide links, but it is one of those simple exercises where you can take a look. There's a brilliant Les Binet. We'll provide a link to that too, but it's about intention. People put their intention into this thing, and it's a proxy. And I think there's also an important thing that you got to be careful with the words. It's a proxy.
Yes.
But it's very brilliant. And I think it's one of those revelations, once again, that I want to hand over to more people, just so you can start improving, not just on your own ground. It's really interesting because I think self-improvement is the goal here, just as long as you're better. But you got to be stronger, I guess, is the
yeah. I mean, this is it. What we're not suggesting is that you kind of, there's a risk in setting market share targets and share of search targets as well. What we found is that there's a ratio of about 70% match between, on average, across 30 odd categories, multiple different countries, different languages. Share of search kind of correlates to about 70%. Now, what that means is that, and we've identified, I'm sure some of your listeners will have heard of the Aaron but Bass Institute. We mentioned it a couple of times, and they talk about physical and mental availability. I've also added another one called digital availability, just to confuse matters. But what mental availability, we believe, is a almost perfect representation of share of search. That is consumer demand. Now, you can drive demand and market share through physical and digital availability, distribution and kind of, can you get your product into stores, et cetera, but that only makes up a proportion. The other is people buying it, and that is where the majority of demand comes from, consumer demand, and that is where we see share of search being a beautiful proxy for is mental availability, consumer-led demand. And yeah, you're absolutely right, Jake. Proxy, it moves. It's correlation. It's not causation.
I'll put a big disclaimer. We'll put big flags all over the place. Just come in wearing a huge disclaimer. Okay, let's get to this couple last questions, and then we'll release everybody. So, say you're facing an audience of 10,000 marketers, and you're just about to step off the stage, and you have time to say one thing to them about measuring the customer journey. What's the advice that you send into the arena?
I would say this is understanding the two ends of the journey. The top end is, what is your TAM? What is your maximum opportunity? What is your category that you play in? And then know what your competitive performance is like. How are you performing relative to your competition? So what's the opportunity? How are you performing relative to the competition? Knowing kind of the north and the south of that provides you with your game board. And that those two for me are the most important pieces of data. And then the rest is, mapping it out, et cetera. But those two, if you don't have anything, try and get those two. And you should be set. It's the game board.
God, and so many people just don't even want to do that. They don't even want to do the checkers or the chess. They just want to go straight to the prize round. So, James, you're amazing. Everyone knows this. Now they know it. What's the best way for people to learn about you and find you and connect with you online?
So I tweet a reasonable amount at JCP Hankins on Twitter. And my blog, although I haven't written anything for a couple of months anyway, my blog has got a repository of all the papers that I've written in the last couple of years. And that's the eqplanner.wordpress.com. Other places to look, I have published with Marketing Week, with WARC on the IPA website. There's a load of free stuff where me and Les take people through share of search, et cetera. So there are a variety of different places, but Twitter and my blog are where you'll see the most recent updates.
Cheese or chocolate?
Okay, here we go. Cheese or chocolate?
Cheese.
Billy Joel or Billy Idol?
Oh, Billy Idol.
All right. Stretchy pants or stretchy budget?
Oh, stretchy pants every single time.
You don't like money? Okay, whatever. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Sharks or lawyers?
Sharks.
That's the humane decision. And finally, shares voice or share of voice?
Oh, I mean, I'd just see, if I could turn back time, it'd have to be shares voice.
What Gets Measured is a Ninja Cat podcast. Please rate and review the show wherever you find your podcasts. Share this episode on social and visit us on the web at ninjacat.io.